get on with this evening. So are you happy to kick off, Shane? And then if anybody joins us, brilliant. If not, they can catch the recording in an upcoming newsletter.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to kick off, David.
Oh,
yeah,
no.
sure. I can fly through it. Just the pertinent points. Let me see. You've given me sharing rights, haven't you?
I have, yes. So you should be able to share it.
Right.
There we go.
Hopefully you can see that.
There we go. Yes.
Hey. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. I suppose for those that don't know me, my name's Shane Elliott. I'm the Northern Ireland rep. Hoping you can understand my accent, but I'm the housing and health lead in Northern Ireland. So I am a split funded post. I work with the Department of Health or the Northern Ireland Government and the Northern Ireland Housing Executive, which are the strategic housing authority in the north here. So I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour of some of the stuff that may be of interest that's happening in Northern Ireland at the moment. And there's a number of work streams that may be of particular interest given the forum. Let me take that slideshow from the beginning, actually. Might be better. That's better. So some of the things we're looking at, we've recently reformed the departmental forum. And just for interest, in Northern Ireland, it's sort of the two main government departments with responsibility for housing for people with disabilities are the Department of Health, obviously through occupational therapy services as the assessor of need, and the Department for Communities, who oversee the provision side with the various housing providers in Northern Ireland, the housing associations and the Northern Ireland Housing Executive. So we've got the two departments back into the room together, and there was a gap with COVID and with my predecessor leaving and a range of other pressures that those two departments had really stopped formally talking to each other in terms of how we were doing, what we were doing, when we were doing it. So we've reformed that forum and it's now referred to as the Interdepartmental Housing and Health Adaptations Programme Board. So that really gives us an ability to influence the strategy and policy of what's going on in Northern Ireland. So I've been in the job now a year. If I've achieved nothing else, that has been the biggest achievement, believe me, getting the right people from the departments to agree that they were prepared to sit in such a forum. So we've had 2 meetings now. So that's enabled me to take forward a number of work streams, some of which I'll talk to you about now. This one's not so, well, it is pertinent to housing, but we are leading on a regional review of assistive technology services. And by that, I mean, we call assistive technology, as we're using it as an umbrella term for your community equipment services, your wheelchair services, the minor adaptation services. And I was sent today, Jill, you had the connections that you get through the specialist section. Alison Doherty, I have spoken to, and she sent me just today, hot off the press, that Scotland have went out to consultation with their piece of work as of today. A really impressive piece of work. So Alison and I had been in touch, and I'm meeting her again to sort of share what we're doing, because there's a lot of similarities in terms of what we're trying to achieve. So that connects. Thanks for that, Jill. That connection was priceless. And the document that's coming out of Scotland is very, very impressive, I have to say. I've only literally looked at it at 5 o'clock. So that's going on. And we're also looking at how the equipment services interface with housing. That will be a major part of that review, and how they're resourced, how they're commissioned, how they're procured, how the KPIs that sit there, the standards. And so it's fairly wide ranging in terms of what we're trying to achieve with that. There's then, we're inputting to the relevant strategies, basically to ensure housing is considered. And the 2 biggies in Northern Ireland at the moment is the adult social care reform is out for consultation at the moment. And I've had a number of meetings with the team leading on that. And I'm formulating a consultation response with my housing executive hat on, just to be sure, because I was very impressed by the English white paper that came out around the reform of adult social care and the numerous references and how embedded housing was in the English paper. I was a wee bit concerned that what went out in the consultation in Northern Ireland was a bit light. So we're really making sure that what the final document looks like, we have got housing right front and center of that document. So that's a major piece of work. The other major strategy, there's a number, but these are the two biggies as they're developing they're revising the autism strategy, which will be a 23 to 28 5-year strategy. And again, I've had a number of meetings with autism forums and the team that are leading on that strategy, again, to look at how we ensure that housing is embedded in that document. So again, that's an important piece of work. So that will be coming out for consultation probably before the end of this year. We're currently updating best practice guidance for access to housing adaptations. And basically that's the eligibility for housing adaptations. I don't like the terminology criteria, so we try to stay away from that. It's best practice guidance, so we don't want it to be too restrictive or too black and white. So it is guidance that we're really encouraging practitioners to use a professional judgment to interpret, as opposed to being very definitive and black and white about what people are entitled to, because I just have the view that people tend to hide behind criteria and then it becomes computer says no. So with that guidance is being developed, hopefully will be out by probably realistically September, October, when we factor in the summer months. We have updated our adaptations design toolkit. I'm not sure, some of you may be aware of the existence of the toolkit, which really lays out how we communicate and what space standards we apply for housing adaptation provision in Northern Ireland. And that was implemented in 2014 originally. So we've reviewed it, reformatted, and I've sort of led the team that have looked at that to relaunch it. So we've finished the final draft. It's now in publication. We have it with our communications people who are polishing it up and professionalizing it and make it a more presentable document. So again, with the summer, we're hoping to get that out before June, but I think with the summer, it could realistically be August or September. And that will be available on the Housing Executive website and the Department of Health website, freely available to anybody who wants to access it, basically. So we're not particularly precious about that, but we think we've done a good job in tidying it up and bringing it up to current standards. So that's been a major piece of work this last few months. We're in the process of developing an inclusive design guide. We're calling it Housing Design to Support Independent Living. And the focus of that guide is really primarily on cognitive and sensory impairment, ASD, LD, because we already have the toolkit. There's a plethora of guidance around mobility standards and physical features to accommodate mobility in wheelchairs. So we've really wanted to focus on the cognitive and sensory side. And again, Jill, your connection with Paul Bellamy, who's developing the Scottish guide, and I've had a number of meetings with Paul, and we're again sharing experiences and the similarities. Again, it's incredible once you actually sit down with other jurisdictions how we're on the same page with many things. So I continue to meet with Paul and we update each other where we're at with those guides. So again, big thanks to Jill. That Celtic connection is working very well across the sea to Scotland. Believe it or not, where I sit as a crow flies, I'm closer to Scotland than I am to Belfast. So there you are. So that shows you how closely connected we are. Interagency complex case management guidance. We're doing work, and again with my health and housing hat on, we're looking at the critical interfaces, and we're looking at really developing a better complex case guidance approach and a more collaborative approach to manage complex cases. Because I certainly get involved in the job that I am with what I call responsibility tennis, where the OTs have bounced it across to housing and are blaming the delays in housing, and then housing are bouncing it back to OT and blaming the delays. So to try and move away from that, we're trying to formalize what the case management approach, but for complex cases, and again, there's a bit of work in defining what we mean by complex cases, because complex in housing is a very different definition to complex in health. So we're looking at a joint definition to try and clarify that, and then developing clear guidance about how we would like practitioners on both housing and health to work through those cases, so they don't sit in systems forever and a day whilst one side bats it back and forth to the other. We're introducing partnership forums between housing and health. And we're piloting one in late May. So we're looking at the membership of that. And basically in Northern Ireland, there's 3 major housing sectors, north, south, and then Belfast. So we're piloting it in the northern sector. And that's where we will have housing providers, housing executive, housing association representatives, service users, the trusts, technicians, grants officers, etc., all in the same room. And they will meet, it'll be a quarterly forum that will meet every 3 to 4 months and sort of address those issues that are pertinent to their sector. So that's, again, we're piloting that in May, so I'll be better informed about how that's going later in the year when we roll it out and implement it right across the north. And then we're setting up and looking at managing and implementing an accessible housing register. Again, Northern Ireland, like many areas, we haven't really great data on where our accessible housing stock actually is. We have developed an accessible housing register, and we're now looking at how we populate that. So we need, the housing executive, as the biggest landlord, need to go out and survey a lot of their stock. And that's going to be timely in the doing because they've something like 80,000 properties, 80 to 90,000 properties. So we're starting to work through the surveys of those properties to define their accessibility, and the register is sort of a sliding scale of accessibility. And hopefully once we get that populated, which we anticipate it anticipate that'll be 2025, it'll be fully populated, then we'll have much better data on where our accessible stock is so that we can use it more appropriately and allocate to the people that need it. We're implementing training for frontline housing executive staff around autism, because certainly I got involved in cases where it's quite clear those hidden disabilities, frontline staff who aren't trained just don't pick up on the signs, don't pick up on the fact that this individual may have an issue. So we're rolling out training as to how you can spot that, and when you spot it, how you can adapt your communication style and even your environments, the office environments, to make that more user friendly. So we're doing that in the not too distant future. We're developing clear housing pathways, because the housing pathways at the moment are quite difficult to navigate. So if someone with a disability presents to a housing office, it can be quite difficult to get your head around what direction am I going here, because there's a number of different pathways. We've developed building control guidance document for minor adaptations, and really that lays out, we've worked with building control very closely on this. It lays out what the responsibilities minor adaptation providers have in terms of the types of works that require building control certification. So we've actually defined, if you're completing this piece of work, it will require certification and you need to do that. And here's where you will find your local building control office. That document's finished. We're just looking to where we implement it and where we host it. And again, it'll be hosted freely available to anyone else who may be interested in doing something similar. So that's finished. We're taking forward a piece of research. Probably I've just finished the proposal to look at the outcome and effectiveness of our housing adaptation provision, particularly in relation to the toolkit, which lays out what we see as our space standards. So we want to test, and whilst the space standards were worked out and mapped out using disabled people in a clinical environment, we've never really properly tested them after the work is completed. And our focus is going to be, has it made a difference to your safety, your independence, and your quality of life? So we really want to try and build our evidence base in Northern Ireland, which isn't great. There's a whole lot of stuff, and the specialist section through Genhome had done wonderful work on that, but we've never tested our space standards properly. So I'll probably be starting that research. The proposal's just going forward now, so it'll be later this year. And then lastly, we're looking at the potential development. I think it'll be next year, but certainly the two departments are showing an interest in the development of a housing and health strategy for Northern Ireland, which will really welcome. I'd probably end up, we'll lead on it within the health side. but that's a work in progress. So the departments are showing really positive signs of an interest. But as we come out of, well, hopefully come out of COVID, the timing is maybe just not right. So I think that could be something that starts 2023. And there will be a wee bit of work on that. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. Next steps in terms of the specialist section is really I need to engage better with the Northern Ireland membership, and that has, as reps will know, that hasn't just been as easy since we transitioned into the RCOT. I want to identify what the priorities of membership are. We need to seek to increase our membership and our participation. And lastly, I really want to arrange face-to-face events and get people more engaged in the specialist section in whatever way we can. And I just think that sometimes we need to get round the room together to do that better. And that's me, David. You'd be glad to know. I hope I've kept to my time. I think I have.
Oh,
so
perfect.
Yes.
Absolutely perfect.
Okay, so I'm hoping if there's any questions, or maybe you want to move on and come back.
Has anybody got, do we have any questions from any of our delegates? Rachel got a question. You're on mute, Rachel.
Yeah, sorry. You mentioned in the research that you're going to do around the spatial standards. I know there's some work going on around the British standards. Is that linking into that?
Our focus is going to be on our toolkit space standards, Rachel.
Right. Okay. Right.
It's going to be very specific to those toolkit space standards, that our adaptations are being completed to those standards. So It will be a very focused piece of work on that, because we need to evidence that what we have agreed to actually works, and assure our housing providers and partners that it's providing value for money, and show the benefits of that across. So it is specific to our own toolkit standards.
Right. Can I just also praise you on your toolkit as well? Because I know I get a lot of OTs that contact me in England around, just having something to base some decision making on. And your document that is the one that I often both refer OTs to, as well as members of the public who are perhaps challenging some of the decisions that are being made around the DFG. So just a bit of a pat on the back in terms of that document.
Well, thanks for that, Rachel. I appreciate that. I really do appreciate that. Now we've reviewed it, we're reformatted. The space standards haven't changed, but we're turning it into a more professional and presentable document, because if I think back to 2014, we pulled the final document together a bit, if I'm being honest, and it wasn't really as presentable as we'd liked. So that will be coming out, I would say September, before you'll actually see it hosted on the executive website. But thanks for that. That's good to hear.
Has anybody else got any questions? Fiona's asking.
Jill, I'm just seeing your question on the chat. Yeah, I can share that with you, no problem. Yeah.
No, I can't remember. I can't even remember my own running order.
It's me next, I think.
It's you next. Oh, thanks.
I think so. Is that right? Somebody else confirm that?
let me open the PowerPoint.
I mean, it doesn't really matter, but I'm sure I wrote it down somewhere when you sent it through. I think it's
yes, it's you, Jill.
Okay. Let's see if I can share then. And I'm going to be struggling to follow Shane with all his joined upness and influencingness, and yeah, right at the heart of everything. But let's see. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, so right. Oh, I can see all you guys. What can you see? The slides and me. Yeah, that's weird. Anyway, that's great. Okay, I've just kind of pulled together some of the sort of main things that are going on in Scotland at the moment. And yeah, for people who don't know me, sorry, I'm Jill Pritchard. I'm the special section rep for Scotland. I am a self-employed person, partly kind of with an OT hat. around some of the sort of, been doing a bit of work around some of the kind of strategic and national agenda since I've been self-employed, but also more recently, but very much involved in placemaking, which is a fascinating area and one to which occupational therapy skills are so closely matched. So yeah, anyway, that's kind of an aside. I'm also kind of the coordinator for the Housing LIN in Scotland. We're trying to do some work just to get the Housing LIN a bigger profile in Scotland and meet the needs of our Scottish colleagues across housing, health and social care. And also I'm Vice Chair of Horizon Housing Association, which is a specialist housing association, wheelchair housing, but a part of a much bigger group which has a much bigger influence than we can have, and trying to do a lot of influencing and lobbying of Scottish Government and others via that route. So I'll do the slide show, or maybe that'll change what people can see. Okay, so I did consult with Alison Kerr, who is our Scotland policy officer, DI's equivalent in Scotland, and just kind of to check with her what she would want to highlight in terms of the kind of broader agenda in Scotland. So clearly the biggest thing really that's going on for us that's going to affect everything, everything we do is the development of the new National Care Service. So that started off, and colleagues might be aware, in terms of it was a review of adult social care, which kicked off within COVID days, very much because of some of the big challenges that had happened across social care as COVID started to impact. And one of the biggest issues that it was to address was the sort of discrepancy between how health is viewed and treated and paid, our health colleagues, as opposed to how social care is viewed and treated, given that everybody was clapping for the National Health Service on their doorsteps, and it took them a wee while to realise that actually social care helped to kind of really keep things together as well. So the Scottish Government loved the recommendations of the review of adult social care, which was carried out by Derek Feely, and they have built on that and gone a lot further in terms of their ambitions for the National Care Service. And the first quote there is from the First Minister, which she's saying it's arguably the most significant public service reform since the creation of the National Health Service. And it has become what it seems to have become, and there's still lots of consultation going on this, and there will be further consultation hopefully, but it's almost making social care, now I shouldn't prejudice this, but part of the National Health Service, kind of, in its attempt to make it equal and get some equality there. But basically it's about trying to give equal access across the whole of Scotland to social care supports, recognising, as we all know, the postcode lottery with the whole range of services that people access currently, and indeed in terms of the quality of the care sometimes. They really want to emphasise the focus on prevention and early intervention and anticipatory care. Now, that's been talked about for quite a long time in Scotland, and I think I've got at least one Scottish colleague here, and I think she would probably agree with me that for all the talk about shifting the focus onto early intervention and prevention, it's been very, very difficult to see changes in that regard. And really they want responsibility for adult social care to be set out in law along similar lines to those established for health services. And this is about this parity of esteem between health colleagues and social services colleagues, and indeed the services that they provide. So it's kind of watch this space with this. One of the documents that came out initially, I think, mentioned occupational therapists only twice in like a 90-page document. Disappointingly as well, there was a recent publication, the Health and Social Care Workforce Strategy for Scotland, and occupational therapy in an 80-page document was mentioned once, and it was in relation to primary care and mental health. So we've got a wee bit of a battle in terms of our ability to influence our Scottish Government colleagues, Shane, and I'm very envious of your ability to actually speak to the people who are writing this stuff. That we're struggling to even get a seat at the table. However, we do have Carolyn MacDonald, who is the AHP lead in the Scottish Government, who happens to be an occupational therapist, and she is at that table, but she's got a big wide portfolio in terms of what she needs to bring to bear there. But as part of the National Care Service, so we had integration of health and social care on the back of legislation, the Public Bodies Working Act in 2014. And so we now have integrated joint boards across Scotland, 31 of them, with health and social care partnerships who have been working to integrate health and social care services since about 2015. And that's going to be thrown up in the air and reformed into something similar but with a different name. That's going to be the governance structure. That's the proposed governance structure for the new National Care Service. So that's very much going to be taken away from local authorities. So social work in its just about its entirety, including potentially criminal justice services, is going to be taken away from local authorities and brought into a kind of centralised service delivered by these local, whatever they become, health and social care type partnerships. So yeah, we've got a wee bit of ways to go. There will be further consultation and further opportunities to influence going forward. So it's kind of watch this space and very much trying to draw on the lessons from across the other countries in terms of what's been successful. And again, really very much trying to get housing as a kind of key partner within that integration agenda going forward. So next, other current consultations just now. So Shane mentioned that the revised equipment and adaptation guidance from the Health Department of Scottish Government, and this is part of our challenge, is we very much have health in Scottish Government and we have housing in Scottish Government. And again, I'm very envious of Shane's joined upness in that regard. It would be lovely if we were a bit more joined up there. And this is health guidance that has just been revised from, I don't know, it hadn't been revised for a good number of years. It used to be very much focused on equipment, but it's very much been widened out to include adaptations, and that's out for consultation just now. And Alison Kerr, the policy officer, and the college centrally at HQ, we're working together to get a group of our members together to respond collectively to that consultation. And again, that's where it's great to be part of that wider membership group, and we can just pull people in who are experts in this field to consult on that. So looking forward to that. There's also a big consultation out at the moment on health and social care strategy for older people. And that runs until 19th of June. And again, talking to Alison Kerr about the best way for us to work together. And I'm really keen that we work together. Alison and I have worked together very much since we've both been in post to kind of pull the right kind of OTs in across the country to respond to these things. So the health and social care strategy for older people has been really interesting because it's very much been a co-production approach with older people in developing that. And a couple of things that have come out of that is the challenge around health inequalities generally, and the kind of importance of trying to prevent isolation and frailty in older people. And again, a lot of that's been highlighted by the impact of COVID over the last couple of years and how important that is to address that. But one of the other things that's come out really importantly from older people themselves is the importance of place for them, which again is really interesting in a way of us getting involved, I think, from that kind of wider housing and urban environment perspective, which we're as OTs very well placed to kind of input into. And again, a big focus in this document on prevention and person-centred care, which is great, and a big emphasis on community-based responses, if you like, what really kind of, again, this has been a lesson I think that a lot of us have learned in COVID times, is how quickly the local communities mobilised and actually delivered services and responded to need locally quicker than actually statutory services could do. So really important to kind of capitalise on that. So that's forming quite a big part of that consultation. And then I suppose more specifically in relation to our housing agenda, Scottish Government published their Housing to 2040 vision the year before last, I think it probably is now, and within that included a number of commitments that we were very happy to see, and that a lot of us have been wanting to see for a long time. So the first is the review of our design guide in Scotland, Housing for Varying Needs, which Shane referred to. It's our colleague Paul Bellamy who's been seconded into Scottish Government to review that document. That document was 30 years old. It was great in its day and still had some good stuff in it, but the world has changed in the last 30 years. And again, just reflecting on what Shane was saying there, a lot of that is about taking a much wider approach to some of the environmental challenges that people have because of particular needs or disabilities. And it's not just about, when I started as an OT in 1980, it was very, very focused on physical disability and physical needs. And as we know, people's needs and challenges are much wider and indeed more complex and multivarious too. So we're very much looking forward to that coming out. The consultation should be coming out very soon on that. They've also committed to, within that, a review of adaptation services more generally. That hasn't started, but again, we're kind of hopeful of some big improvements. There's been lots of attempts to improve and streamline the adaptations service across Scotland over the years, and it's been a kind of frustrating challenge for us. So we're very much pinning hope on this bigger review, hopefully building on a lot of other things that are going on, including that the review of equipment and adaptations that have come out from health that we were just talking about, but also I've been involved as the occupational therapy rep on the Scottish Government's dementia transition strategy and within their housing subgroup. And a lot of the recommendations that are coming out from that are actually applicable across all client groups in terms of things like, you know, more information and advice up front, more early intervention and prevention. Again, just reflecting on what Shane was talking about in terms of eligibility, a much wider person-centred approach to that. I'm absolutely with you, Shane, in terms of not having a list of things that we can provide, but assessing people in terms of what are their needs and then looking at ways of providing solutions to their needs in a very sort of flexible way. And then also within that, the dementia transition work, we talked a lot about having those early housing conversations with people so we can empower people with information and advice to help them start thinking about how their future housing needs might go and start making decisions earlier and planning rather than at crisis point, as again many of us here will have experienced. And the other thing that we're hoping, and I don't know if they'll take this recommendation, it's one of my personal favourites, is to hold services to account for the delivery of adaptations. We hold lots of services, statutory services to account for lots of staff, but in Scotland we don't really hold anybody to account for the delivery of adaptation services. So that's a big hope, of a personal hope of mine. Going back to Housing to 2040, one of the other commitments is a development of a tenure neutral accessible housing standard, which would be absolutely fabulous. And if that happens before I retire, then yep, my work will be done. So again, there's a sort of 3-year programme of work, I think, within Housing to 2040, and the accessible housing standard comes towards the end of that. So another couple of years before we see some progress on that. But that's a huge challenge for us across all tenure to get a better standard there. One of the other sort of current pieces of work that's going on is the Scottish Council on Learning Disability has formed a housing reference group, and at the moment I'm the rep for the specialist section on that. I had hoped to try and get someone else to do that, but I know people are really busy, so I'm trying to keep my hand in there at the moment, and that's a lot about some of the challenges around out of area placements for people with learning disabilities and very complex needs and challenging behaviour, which is a huge issue in Scotland. So hoping to see some great improvements there. I put in this bit about adaptations to common parts, which is a piece of legislation that was introduced, I think, just last year. Angela will probably correct me if I'm wrong, but it was an attempt to address those areas where, as it says, you're trying to adapt the common part of maybe a block of flats and the challenge of getting other tenants and our owners to agree. And legislation was brought in which attempted to improve the situation there. And I suppose this was, I put this in partly to demonstrate the importance of the special interest group as well, in terms of a few of my members came to me and said, we're having challenges with this legislation. Can we work together to do something about this? So I was able to link in with the colleague at Scottish Government who had been responsible for that. So we got some input from her. We've had some input from the OTs, and we're hoping to make some changes going forward, and certainly give more guidance to our fellow occupational therapists that will be helpful going forward. So yeah, just an example of the power of the specialist section. And then I just wanted to mention lastly really the recently published Motor Neuron Disease Scotland Association's research on housing and adaptations, which was a very challenging read, I think, and you can imagine the kind of challenges, you're very well aware of the types of challenges that people with a life-limiting condition like that, like motor neuron disease, face. So there's work to be done there, but again, hoping that their recommendations can feed into the review of that wider review of adaptations, because a lot of it really cuts across a lot of other client groups as well. So that was really all I was going to go through. Just one other thing I suppose to mention is that we do have quite a few pieces of research going on in Scotland at the moment around adaptations. My colleague, Dr. Vicky McCall from the Stirling University of Stirling, is very active in this area, and also my colleagues in Horizon Housing Association. So there's quite a lot of activity around building a bit more of the evidence. I know we have quite a lot of evidence base, but it's like Shane's saying, there's still kind of opportunities to fill in some gaps. So I am hoping that we can report on that maybe at conference later in the year, or if not, maybe at a webinar or something, and pull together some of that work. And again, I hope that will feed into the review of adaptations from Scottish Government's perspective. So thank you. Sorry, that was a bit of again, a whistle stop tour. Really happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you, Jill. That was amazing. It sounds like you've had sounds like there's a busy time going across Northern Ireland and Scotland.
Yes,
lots of things happening.
Yeah, we just need a bridge. We just need a bridge. If Boris would just build a bridge, everything would be fine.
Boris was going to do that, as you know.
I know.
Sure, Boris is going to do a lot of things
until he had the £30 billion price tag.
Absolutely.
But the National Care Service sounds like a fantastic development.
It has the opportunity, absolutely, to be, David, if we get the opportunity to shape it. Do you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all I'll say.
Anybody have any questions? Everybody's quiet. This is what I don't really like about the webinars. You can't see people's faces. Yeah, I've picked up a wee comment from Shane, so yeah, happy to share that. The common parts legislation sounds that sounds quite intriguing, because that's something that well, it's something that flummoxes quite a lot of things, especially when you've got shared access and things. Yeah, absolutely. It'd be interesting to see what your working group comes up with on that. Yeah. So we've got some output. We can share the legislation and share the output and see, you know, if that's either helpful, or if you've got other ideas, that would be great. Yeah, no, it'd be fantastic to have a look at that.
We were going to start taking a look at that, Jill. That's why I'm interested. So yeah.
Okay. Well, you can learn the lessons from the pitfalls of where
absolutely.
Scottish Government colleagues maybe went a wee bit awry.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much both for that. And we've now got Di Davis, who's given us a talk about what's happening in Wales. Welcome, Di. Thanks.
Share my screen now. Okay.
Yep.
Can you see my screen?
I can, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so you can see that. Hi everyone. I'm Di Davis. I'm the professional practice lead for Wales. So in each of the countries, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and in Wales, we've got a professional lead that does all things influencing on behalf of the profession. So I've got a huge remit. So I influence on every aspect of OT. So this week in Wales, I've been responding back to the mental health workforce consultation. So unlike my illustrious predecessors, I'm not an expert in housing, unfortunately, but I can give you a good viewpoint on the legislative background that might have an influence on housing, and there's quite a lot of similarities actually. I'm an OT by background, but I was a mental health OT. So luckily for everyone, I've only got 2 slides in that regard, so it might not be as long as my other participants. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the programme of government and the Plaid Cymru Labour Cooperation Agreement. Obviously, we had elections last year in Wales, where Labour won the election, but they only got 30 seats because of a proportional nature of our parliament. They generally always have to go into some form of agreement with another party. So they've taken a little while to do it, but Plaid Cymru and Labour have agreed to do this cooperation agreement. So it's not a coalition as such, but it's more about a cooperation that Plaid will vote on matters that are agreed between them. It's basically a coalition, but all but name, to be perfectly honest. So the first thing is the creation of a national care service, which might make our English colleagues a bit envious because Scotland are going to have one and we are going to have one now in Wales. We're in a slightly different dimension than in Scotland, that we didn't have a all-encompassing review of social care like the field report that Scotland have. So there's no real base principles to work this from at the moment. So what Welsh Government has done is set up a expert group of 12 people to report back to them by April, which is a 6-week period of how they could deliver a national care service free at the point of need. It's a very optimistic group, to be perfectly honest, and nobody can understand quite how they're going to manage to do that in 12 weeks. So the membership of the group are generally of quite a lot of academics, a few old members of ADSS, which is the Directors of Social Services Group, and some old sort of chief executives of Social Care Wales. I managed to talk to 1 or 2 of them, and they're pretty open to what they're going to try and find out. So in my obviously in the day job in trying to influence, I've spoken to the Minister for Health and Social Care, and I've had a meeting with our First Minister, Mark Dreyford. And in Labour's opinion, even though they haven't said it so publicly, that the National Care Service won't be a standalone National Care Service like the NHS, or neither would it be integrated with the NHS. They still think that delivery of social care should be delivered by local authorities, local councils. So that is obviously going to be quite different to what they are having in Scotland by all accounts. So there's politics involved in that, because the big player in local government in Wales is the Labour Party, and the Labour Party in the Senedd are quite nervous of that big block of people. They've tried to organise the councils in the past, and they fell flat on their face by the strength of feeling. So I think that's what it's going to be. And speaking to the Chief Social Care Officer, he sort of believes that it'll be a sort of framework. It'll be a framework where we'll have a national social care office, which he will lead, which will have a branch of sort of frameworks that the local councils would have to follow. So there'd still be local delivery. The local councils would still have to deliver, but they would be more restricted in what they did, because they'd have to follow some more rigid guidance. There's one main thing that they talked about quite a lot is actually the provision of social care is brought more in-house, and the private sector is less dominated or less relied on. Again, we've got a Labour government, which is quite a left-wing Labour government, so they want provision to be brought in-house. So as we've advocated quite a lot about OTs, are really a cost-effective way of doing a national care service that's free at the point of need. We've talked about like housing is a major preventative intervention, and rehab as well. So watch this space, to be honest. I don't think they're going to report back in April. It's really optimistic. myself, like Alison is doing up in Scotland now, we're going to try and get on any sort of boards that come up. And obviously, if there's any Welsh people here, please share any information you get, because information is really powerful, and we need to be on these programs. So yes, that's the National Care Service. So interesting times. And we'll see how there is. So the next sort of thing from the programme government, which Labour had in their manifesto and Plaid Cymru has signed up for, is laws on adequate housing. And the focus seems to be on affordability, supply, second homes and rent at the moment. But the term adequate housing could be open to all sorts of interpretations. So we're really keen to see when that comes out in the next 5 years, what they mean by that, because there might be some connotations to us in occupational therapy around that. So that's something to keep for the Welsh members to keep an eye on. Welsh Government is already using its powers in relation to councils as second homes. Obviously, like in Scotland and lots of parts of England, we've got a major problem with home ownership. So lots of the councils in West Wales and North Wales are increasing council tax quite significantly for all the lets and stuff like that. The next one, again, because we've got a bit of a socialist government that's quite keen on the public sector doing stuff. There's a proposal for a national construction company called UNOS to build social housing. So that would be a nationalised construction company, which is really, really radical, I think, you know what I mean? We've got excellent examples of OTs working at local councils, working with some of our social housing providers, helping design sort of social housing, that sort of stuff. So I think that's when that company is created, I think that would be a good in for us. So when they start building, of getting OTs to be part of the design and the sort of development of new social care housing provision in Wales. And I think that's really exciting sort of aspect, actually. So yeah, so it's a proper socialist nationalised company there, so which is obviously quite different to what we got in England. In the last year, the Minister has announced that she wants the councils to remove the means test for small and medium DFGs. She's done this by sort of trying to bribe them in a way, by giving them extra money through the Enable grant in Wales. From what we got from members, only about half the councils are doing that because they think the grant won't cover the likely cost of increased adaptation. So we think Welsh Government will have to tell them by legislate to do that. So there might be some changes in legislation for DFGs if they want to go through that process. Housing is separate from health in Welsh Government. We were on a housing Welsh Government group, adaptive group, which defies a few housing standards and did some research on adaptations. That hasn't sat for 2 years, unfortunately, because of the pandemic. So we're waiting on the civil servants to call us back on that. We've got a rep and I go to it as well. And then in relation, because I'm not part of the specialist section, I get my housing advice from the COTEG group. So we've got in Wales a group of senior leaders within social care and housing that sit on a group that meets maybe once every 2 months to discuss all things OT and social care. I think they have had a housing specialist sections rep on there, but as I think it might be a good idea for the housing specialist section to have a good connection to them, and then maybe you get a bit more Welsh representation on the specialist section, because they meet and they discuss all things housing, and I can't see any reason why not, that they can't link in with this specialist section group. Maybe it's another way of increasing your reach in Wales, and the next time you have a webinar like this, maybe one of them could come and present on behalf of Wales, who would have a bit more understanding of housing. And that's it, to be honest, if that's okay.
That's fantastic, thanks, Guy.
No props.
I wasn't aware that National Care Service was coming. Has that led from the Healthy Wales document? That
No, it's...
Is it related to that at all?
No. No, it's because of the cooperation agreement, and it's one of the big things Plaid Cymru wanted. A few of the Labour politicians have advocated in the past. Nobody's come from that. So this is why there's no real background to it.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a sticky finger up in the air at the moment.
So does that kind of mean that it's going to, that social care has become free at the point of use? Like
that's what they want. That's what they want. So like they don't want to change the legislation. Our legislation is the Social Service and Wellbeing Act.
Yeah, it's only been in a little while, isn't it?
Yeah, so when I spoke to Mark Dreyfus, the First Minister, he's like, we're not changing our legislation. So that legislation set up our regional sort of partnerships, regional partnership boards in Wales, and housing sits in there. So again, it would be modifying the current structures to reduce variation, I think. So, yeah. So
I'm assuming that's would that lead to sort of same access criteria, or across, so whether you get cover from Anglesey across to Newport, all of that, so you get more or less
definitely
same level of provision, or as much as possible.
Yeah, or definitely like regional similarity. So if you lived in the valleys, all the valley councils would have the same criteria, and if you lived in North East Wales, all the North East councils would have the criteria. It might not be a one Wales one, but it'd be more than it'd be less criteria than the 22 criteria you've got at the moment.
But will that include a review of pay and grading for professionals working within that?
Absolutely, yes, yeah. So that's our big influencing point at the moment, and we keep on telling them that OTs who work in social care in Wales get paid the £3,000 or £4,000 less than our NHS colleagues. There's some councils in Wales, mind you, that have done a market supplement and increased OTs' wages, but that again, it's only a few councils.
Yeah, it's got market supplements, kind of a sticky plaster on there. Well, that'll be good to see what happens with that.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Don. Thank you.
No problem.
And has anybody got any questions for Don? Anybody? Anything in the chat?
Can I just ask, sorry, can I come in there?
Yeah, of course, Jane.
I asked, I'm very interested in your national construction, the ENOS piece, and what that might look like, or what they're proposing that would look like. Is it in the very early days, Di?
Yeah, it's in, again, it was another part of the cooperation agreement that's only recently been done. I can dig some information out for you and send it to you, Shane, if that's of interest. It's not nothing I've worked on yet, so I'll dig some stuff out to you what's out there. It's very early stages.
I think if you do get some more information on that, I think that's something our members would probably be keen to hear about. So I mean, if perhaps when there's more detail on it, if maybe I can ask you if you wouldn't mind doing just a very short piece for the newsletter, so that members know what it is, and hopefully can advocate for a bit of change across the rest of the country.
No, that sounds fascinating. So no, thanks, Di.
No problems.
Oh, fantastic, thank you. And last but certainly no means least, we've got Rachel joining us from Foundations, who's going to tell us about all the exciting stuff that's been happening in England.
Is my screen sharing now? Yeah, lovely. So yes, I'm Rachel Russell. I'm got the grand title of Senior Regional Advisor at Foundations. For those of you who aren't aware, Foundations, we're contracted by the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities, or Deluxe for short, to be the national body for home improvement agencies. We had our contract renewed in November, and the focus for us as an organisation over the next couple of years is around improving the delivery of the Disabled Facilities Grant, which is the main funding route for adaptations for older and disabled people. So similar to everybody else, I've kind of broken it down into kind of policy bits, kind of new guidance that have come out, and then other interesting bits and pieces that have happened in the last year. Shane's already mentioned the kind of key piece of policy publication that we've had, which is our social care reform white paper, People at the Heart of Care in Adult Social Care. And as Shane has rightly kind of celebrated, there is a lot in the in that policy around the use and role of adaptations and housing in supporting the needs of older and disabled people in terms of that prevention agenda, and obviously ways in which we can meet the social care needs of our population. Just to pull out of that white paper, the kind of key headlines from it is obviously government's continual commitment around the DFG funding and the commitment of around 570 million to support the delivery of adaptations during 2022 through to 25, which is again why I think for us at Foundation that the real emphasis in ensuring that we're making best use of DFG monies and ensuring that we've got good DFG processes within local authorities. Also in the white paper was a new commitment and new monies around delivery of minor adaptations and home repairs, which is basically just new resources for handy person services within local authorities. Again, recognising the essential role that minor adaptations and home repairs have in terms of keeping people well at home. There's also £300 million to improve integration of health. And this has been a kind of theme across the other three nations, and obviously Northern Ireland, you've always had that integrated approach, but obviously in terms of England there is new monies to support that integration of housing into local health and care strategies, and again something that that I think I can't remember who mentioned it before, but one of the things in terms of that integrating housing into the health and social care systems is around supporting housing options, so really providing really good advice early on in people's kind of housing journeys, so that people are thinking around where they should be living, looking at you know, providing that advice to help people make decisions around where they want to age in place. So yes, so that commitment which is within that £300 million there. Also in the white paper is government's commitment to have 3 public consultations specifically around the DFG, the Disabled Facilities Grant. One is around the formula that is used in allocating the DFG budgets to the local authorities. The current funding arrangements is based on, I can't remember how many years old, but I think it was 2007. So it's a very old formula. So there's going to be consultation around looking at that and seeing whether that needs to be updated. There's going to be consultation around the maximum amount allowed for a single adaptations for the Disabled Facilities Grant. Currently the mandatory grant is 30k, and as I say, there's going to be consultation around whether that is raised. Some local authorities do use their housing assistance policy to apply discretion and to top up if adaptations are greater than that. I think probably another thing that has come through is obviously the cost of adaptations, access to contractors. I'm sure we've seen in all the 4 nations has actually significantly increased the cost of adaptations. I think Care and Repair England did some research on in terms of what impact that has had, and I think they were estimating that the cost of adaptations has increased by 25% due to the issues that we've got in terms of those supply chains and the cost of materials, etc. And the other thing that is going to be looked at is the way that the means test is currently done and whether that should be brought in line in terms of some of the recommendations that have been made in another policy around social care charging. Yeah, so those are the 3 consultations that will be coming out hopefully this year off of the back of the white paper. Just in terms of the white paper, I think what the government is trying to do is just trying to kind of use the Better Care Fund offer to ensure that people have got that quick access to adaptations. I think what we all know through research is that the longer people wait for adaptations, one, the less effective they become, because obviously as people wait for adaptations, needs increase. But also actually if we get adaptations in quickly, people actually probably need cheaper or only require cheaper major adaptations. But obviously the longer people wait, needs increase, and then they end up needing more costly adaptations. So there is this commitment through this white paper just to encourage people to look at the DFG process, to look at how we can enable people to have that quick access to adaptations, and obviously using the Better Care Fund route to enable that. The other thing that came through in the white paper is looking and just raising the awareness around affordable assistive technology, mainstream technology, and how that actually can be used to actually support people's health and well-being. So again, I know there's a piece of work that we'll be doing at foundations to raise public awareness and local authorities awareness around actually how we can be using that assistive technology. You know, and it's kind of the mainstream stuff that is available, and just people being aware of how you can use that. In terms of more policy, let me just check I've covered everything yet. In terms of other policy happening out there, is we've also had the Levelling Up white paper. One of the elements in there that is of interest for occupational therapists and housing is the formation of the Housing for Older People's task force. Again, hopefully what they're going to be doing is really focusing on the needs of housing for older people. There is some concern that the focus will rely too heavily on kind of new builds and the offer around that, rather than actually focusing on the 80% of people that are currently living in existing housing stock. So there is just some concern around whether that task force will be really kind of focused very narrowly on kind of new builds and rather than focusing on what we should be doing with the existing housing stock, given some of the issues we've got in England around some of the housing standards that people are living in. In terms of guidance, I think it was 3 weeks ago, we had the first government endorse guidance on the Disabled Facilities Grant, and again, that guidance is very different to previous guidance, as again there's a real focus around providing really good guidance for local authorities around how to deliver the Disabled Facilities Grant. What the government has done is, some of you will be aware that in 2018 the government commissioned a rather large review of the Disabled Facilities Grant, and 76 recommendations was made from that review. I believe well over half of those recommendations are within the new guidance. So for example, one of the recommendations that was made in the DFG review was to have some guiding principles around assessing what should be considered when we're looking at necessary and appropriate. That's one of the kind of main roles that an occupational therapist has within the Disabled Facilities Grant. And as I say, that there were recommendations in the DFG review around 9 principles that should shape the OT assessment, and that is in the new guidance. So that's big news for occupational therapists in England, is that the new guidance. And I think it very much, I'm going to be biased here because I was involved in the DFG review, very much promotes the positive role that occupational therapists have in the DFG, making best use of the OT in those complex cases, really encouraging that integrated ways of working between our housing colleagues and our social care colleagues. So as I say, that guidance was published 3 weeks ago, and as I say, the previous guidance was 2015, I believe, so it's long overdue. And as I said, I'm going to be biased, but I think it's good guidance that really helps and supports what we do as occupational therapists. The other piece of guidance that we have worked with a number of stakeholders, including Habintech, is around providing guidance to housing associations on adaptations. And that guidance is very much around supporting housing associations look at ways to saying yes to adaptations and ensuring timely delivery of adaptations. So that's some more guidance that has been published fairly recently, and again looking at the benefits for housing associations having occupational therapy resource and employing occupational therapists in housing associations, and the benefits of that is in that guidance as well. In terms of a number of reports have been published that might be of interest, so I'm sure this is an issue across all 3 nations, is that a number of the local government ombudsman complaints around contractors' competence. So we have produced, foundations have produced a report around and made recommendations around how we support and ensure that contractors have got competence around the delivery of disabled adaptations. We've also produced a report around hoarding and looking at what good practice looks like. Again, we've pulled on examples across the 3 nations to inform that, that report. One of our biggest reports, where we've had around 10,000 downloads of this report, is a piece of work that we did around guidance for adaptations for children and young people with behaviours and challenge. As I say, it's one of our biggest downloaded documents, and I think just highlights the issues that we have in terms of meeting both assessing and designing adaptations where behaviour is an issue. Off the back of that piece of work, foundations are working with the Royal College Specialist Section for Learning Disabilities and a number of local authorities to look at developing some best practice guidance around how do you do adaptations and assessment and design for people with challenging behaviours. So that's an ongoing piece of work. So last week we held a focus group and I think we had around 40 OTs and technical officers attend that, looking at what their needs were in terms of their learning needs and around assessment and designing for adaptations for challenging behaviour. And as I say, we'll be taking that piece of work forward. There's also a report from the Centre for Ageing Better that's part of the Good Home inquiry that the government set up, that's looked at the issues around poor quality homes. So that's again another really important report around how do we go forward, and they've made some recommendations in that report. Just to do a little bit of shout out for foundations, one of the kind of challenges around how do we ensure that we're doing the DFG in a timely way is around ensuring that the right people are doing the right thing at the right time. And off the back of the RCOT publication, Adaptations Without Delay, we've developed an evidence-based triage tool that helps identify what kind of skills that you need, to help identify, to triage the referrals and help identify what kind of a skill set that you need to support that assessment, particularly where it's going to be a disabled facilities grant. So what skills you need to be able to identify what's necessary and appropriate. The other thing that's been developed with Leeds University is Adapt My Home. So if you Google Adapt My Home, it's a self-assessment tool. And also has a means test tool as well. And again, it just helps members of the public identify whether an adaptation is going to be the right solution and whether somebody's going to have a means test contribution, because often those are the kind of key things that if people know that they've got a means test, often they'll look at other routes rather than going through social care and the DFG. So that's a piece of work that we've done. The other thing that the Adapt My Home tool does as well is look at housing options. And has got, again, a kind of self-assessment tool that helps people explore, actually, do I want to adapt, or actually, is there other solutions? Should I be consider moving? In terms of research, in England, we've got the Bath Out 2 randomised control trial currently underway. So that's a 2-year project that is, as it says, doing randomised control trials on the effectiveness of level access showers. And I think currently there's 6 local authorities that are involved in that randomised control trial. At Foundations, I'm working with Northumbria University, where we're developing, we've got some seed corn funding to look at the feasibility of developing a case study bank and repository so that OTs, technical officers, local authorities can bank case studies that will then allow us to do some cross-case analysis and is another way of us being able to do some outcome measures. And just to say, I know there's not many of us on the line, but we're collaborating with the specialist section on developing an online design guidance, and we're really wanting to encourage RCOT housing members to help us complete a form, a survey that just unpicks some of the clinical reasoning, so that we can help inform that design guidance. And if people want to contact me about that, I have written something up, David, for the newsletter on that. So I know that was
it's due to go out in this month's
April. I know that's a bit of a whistle. I think that's it really. Let me just stop sharing.
Thanks, Rachel. Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you, everybody. The piece of work that Rachel was mentioning, there's a piece going out in our monthly bulletin at the end of this month. So that should be getting to probably towards the last week of the month. So if you are interested in helping out with that, please get in touch with us. I just want to thank all of our speakers for this evening. It's been great to see what's actually happening across the country. One big theme seems to be a review of social care, and hopefully we get that right for the future and it becomes a more sustainable system for everybody. Have we got any questions from any of our participants? Anybody want to ask something? I'm not seeing any hands.
Rachel, is there a link to your DFG guidance? Do you know where?
Yeah, I'll Google it now and then put it in. Can I just ask the other 3 nations? And I appreciate, Di, you might not be able to answer this with perhaps not having, I know you've got your finger on the pulse, as it were, but I'm just interested to know, in terms of the other 3 nations, my sense is that the complexity of work that social care and housing OT, well, probably more social care OTs, has increased because of, certainly in England, we've got policies such as discharge to assess, where suddenly perhaps that assessments that would have been done in hospitals is now, rightly so, being pushed out into the community, but the assessment resource hasn't moved out. And certainly what anecdotally we're hearing is, we talk a lot around adaptations having a huge role in prevention, but what's happening is that wait lists are increasing, and it's those individuals with low level need that need the adaptations that are kind of getting stuck. And I'm just wondering if that is common across the three nations, really.
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely. Yeah, so the discharge to recover to assess model is throughout Wales. It's different sort of levels of the different parts, but that's what all our social care colleagues are telling me anyway. You know, people are coming out of hospital sooner, they're more complex, waiting lists have drastically increased. So it's everything you said. So and that's the general thing that we influence the Welsh Government about as well, to be perfectly honest, about OTs need to be in the right places to make sure that doesn't happen. So no, it's an absolute common thread throughout the last couple of months, unfortunately.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. Sorry, I put my camera off. Yeah, I would agree with that as well, Rachel. I think it's very much the picture in Scotland as well. So I suspect it's all over.
Same, Rachel, and I think the frustration in Northern Ireland is that a lot of the investment has went to these discharge to assess reablement, but they're not dealing with the housing adaptation element in any great way. They might do some of the relatively minor stuff, but everything else been pushed to the social care OTs who are having to pick up the cases and take them forward. So I think that's been a bit of a frustration as well, but those waiting lists are growing here too.
Yeah,
So,
And I think
the other side, sorry, Rachel, just briefly, the other side of what's been happening here is that a lot of our social care OTs have been pulled into hospitals to help out. Because they're so stretched in terms of discharge. And also, I know at least 3 occupational therapists who've been doing home care shifts at the weekend to cover for home care vacancies because we just don't have enough home care staff. So they're just going flat out all over the place.
It's because I think it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Certainly in England, and I think Di mentioned it, or somebody, I can't remember, it might have been, I think it was Di that mentioned this, is the issue for social care is that the OTs are obviously not on agenda for change, so their pay scale, we get paid less basically compared to our health colleagues, so we're disadvantaged there. The other thing, do you think we're missing a trick because we're also not always making the connection with what we do? Not that I'm trying to make what we do medical model, but there's something about that disconnect. There's a lot of talk at RCOT around rehabilitation, and I think we forget that adaptations is part of that suite of interventions that fall under that rehab umbrella. And I just wonder sometimes if we miss a trick. I don't know, perhaps I'm just waffling now, but do you know what I mean? In terms of whether we miss a trick there a little bit, because we've disconnected ourselves in a way from that kind of rehabby bit, but it's such an important strategy, isn't it? And how it's how you define rehab, isn't it?
It is, but we do advocate on that behalf. Obviously, myself and my predecessor, who Crowder's now our capo, we used to sit on the enabler group about adaptation. That's what we used to say about adaptations. They are a medical, they're not a medical, they're an intervention when an OT prescribes them. It's not just given equipment, it's there for a reason in relation to that person's treatment plan. So that's why we try to emphasise the importance of when you need to see an OT, you need to see an OT. It's not just, and sort of emphasising, like, just because you might think of it as a bit of building work, actually it's we're a registered health and social care profession. We just don't give these things out. So we do advocate on that part, if you know what I mean. And that's why this is why we say this is why you need OTs to do it. So we do. It is really difficult to the term rehab, or with myself working in mental health, lots of the stuff I would do in mental health, I wouldn't call rehabilitation. So I mean, it's we're trying to get. I mean, you talk about how that improves your service. You do just. I know we had this rehab campaign, and in relation to Welsh Government, I've had a few conversations with the Health Minister who've asked that should we redeploy social care OTs back into hospitals, and we flatly said no to it. So I can't believe it's happening in Scotland, but obviously it is, you know what I mean? So we flatly refuse, and our local government OTs in Wales have had quite a lot of money on the COVID recovery front to recruit OTs, and they haven't been able to recruit because of pay differences, perfectly honest. So
Ruth got a question.
It's more of a comment, really. I think the one thing about the OTs in social care is that we're unique, or pretty unique, in that we take on both the social care and social model of disability and the medical model.
Yeah.
You know, that's we use our knowledge and our base and you know, our experience and understanding the medical model and the implications of that to then influence the aspects that are the social in the home. And it's one of the things that I've been pushing kind of with my line management. Yes, I'm, you know, it's not a national thing, but I just think that's something that seems to get lost, is, you know, when we are taking two very different strands and actually bringing them together and making a difference that way. So it's just my opinion.
Yeah, it's just towards the Welsh Government stuff, because you've got this housing department is away from the health department. We keep on telling them that, and they struggle to understand it. The civil servants, they really do, and it's a big part of my job trying to give them that link between, you know, our position, especially with the social model. So it's a difficulty in relation. So I envy Northern Ireland with Shane sitting in the housing and the health department.
I mean, speaking from a personal level as a practitioner, and I've always worked in social care since I qualified, there's still very much a them and us with the health service. There's kind of that everybody seems to place more emphasis on the health service, and there's less thought and consideration given to what actually happens in the community, which is actually where people live, where the vast majority of people's interventions should be, and it's probably where the interventions have the greatest impact. And it certainly doesn't help that I work alongside paediatric OTs that get paid £3 or £4 grand more than I do for doing a very similar job.
Yeah.
But I think all that will kind of hopefully work itself out in the end. But it's a fascinating discussion. Anybody else got anything else they want to throw into the mix? Just got silence and nodding heads, no. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us, and a big thank you to our speakers for joining us. And don't forget to sign up to our next webinar, where we will have our very own Ruth Parker telling us about the work she's been doing in Lincolnshire about Mental Capacity Act and deprivation of liberty safeguards with paediatrics. And also our June webinar will be Ailsa Dow joining us from Scotland, talking about stair lifts and cognitive impairments. Ailsa and her colleagues have put together some research into that area, and they published an article in OT News last November. So I think that work will be quite relevant. And they also spoke to us in conference about, was it 3 years ago, Jill?
Yeah.
I think they sort of spoke about some of the preliminary work they'd done then, hadn't they?
Yeah. In Newcastle they spoke. Yes.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, so that would have been 3 years ago. Yeah.
Yep.
So don't forget to sign up for that one. That webinar is at 3:30 in the afternoon. So hopefully it might attract more people. So what you'll tend to see now, the webinars for the rest of this year after June from June onwards, will be at different times of the day. So we're going to try some different formats to hopefully reach a wider section of the audience. So we'll try some sort of afternoon, some lunchtime, and there's going to be a mixture of delivered content and sort of networking type sessions. But also don't forget our national conference is being run on the 3rd and 4th of November. There has been a little hiccup with that. We were expecting it to be held at RCOT HQ, but that venue isn't available any longer. There's been, from what I'm told, there's lots of building works going on, and they're not sure when that's going to be finished by. So RCOT's events team are looking for an alternate venue for us. But yeah, thank you very much, and everybody enjoy their evening. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
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 Bye.